Hello, and thanks for joining this talk about The Altering Shores. The Altering Shores is a VR project which addresses climate change and sea level rise. It was filmed on tidal rivers and shorelines, particularly those shaped by industrialization, where arriving floods will not only inundate the land with water, but will also distribute contaminants, which are found on these industrial settings and abandoned brownfields. This work is the result of a collaboration between myself, as the artist-filmmaker, computational poet Nick Mumford, and composer Adam Vidixis. The 360-degree VR images were filmed along the Delaware River and the Thames River. The images are filmed above water, underwater, and in between. The images are unstable and transport users from positions of safety to those of uncertainty. For example, when you put on the head-mounted VR display, you first see the surroundings that are around you. Soon, however, these settings dissipate and waters wash in, and you're carried out with the waters into a changed environment. As that transformation occurs, from a local to a distant setting, a stream of dots and O's appears and soon forms a kind of horizon line. Then words begin to flow, ebb, course, run along that line. A lot of this text is drawn from my field observations and studies of the shores. Nick Mumford selected that text and wrote other text to enter into the poetry-generating algorithms which he authored. The algorithm constructs lines that attempt to describe the water's movements. But the text is halting. It shuffles the descriptors into differing patterns as if trying to make sense of what is, in fact, impossible to grasp. Soon the phrases mix with the names of the chemicals that are found in those flood zones. The names infiltrate the descriptive text, just as they may one day mix in the waters that will flood cities, farms, and natural preserves if the industrial sites are not cleaned up. The generated soundtrack by Adam Vidixis also expresses this challenge to utter what is perhaps unspeakable. Through a mix of languages, vocalists attempt to name what is shown and what is written. There is emotion, but not comprehension. Sung words are transformed into the sounds of machines and ship horns. Their meanings become incomprehensible. The Altering Shores was first shown on the University of Pennsylvania campus as part of an initiative by the Penn Program in Environmental Humanities, which addresses climate change through the arts with the goal of expanding public awareness and action. The Altering Shores was designed first as a locative work. The locations of the VR sites were shown on GIS maps that could be accessed using mobile phones, and postcard maps were also printed. During the installation, docents were stationed at the mapped locations to help users view the works. The projects were also designed to be easily adaptable to other locations, and the works connect to broader maps that propose self-guided tours in the natural, industrial, and post-industrial settings where the images were filmed. The locative approach in The Altering Shores was also the first stage in a cycle of works that also includes large-scale multimedia installations and performances for public spaces. A first iteration of this expanded work was prototyped with a performance at the Annenberg Center for the Arts at UPenn. Elements depicted in the head-mounted displays and other images were projected onto large screens on the stage. Some audience members were selected to walk among the images with the musicians on the stage, while others watched from the auditorium. As the selected audience members walked among the screens, projected images and text would fall over them. Those viewers who were close to the screens would thus become part of the spectacle, implicated in its narratives, while others watched from afar. So I'm delighted now to be joined by PPEH Director Bethany Wiggin, who had the chance to participate in viewing Altering Shores, both as a work for VR head-mounted displays and as an on-stage audience participant in that live performance.
Participate in the Altering Shores as what I've come to think of as an unscripted performer. It was in November, and months later, I'm still really wrestling with my own emotional response to that portion of the Altering Shores that was live on stage. For that part of the piece, images that were captured, that you captured, in marshlands and industrial wastelands of the Delaware River, they appeared across 3 screens on the stage, and the sequences that the images played in were known really, I guess, only to the combinatory algorithm which chose those images, which made it really hard work for the live actors and maybe particularly for the musicians who you had asked to live accompany this doubly uncertain environment, doubly uncertain because the performers didn't know quite what would happen, and uncertain, of course, because the Altering Shores is about the ways that our shores are altering in a consummately uncertain future. Tell us about what you were trying to make sense of with that portion of the Altering Shores.
Yeah, you were caught up in the middle of it because you're on the stage. We had, I think, 20 audience members like yourself caught among the performers, among the screens, and the sense is you're caught up in the flood, which I think you found to be quite an intense experience. And in that flood, the images and sounds kept coming from different sides, so you're being pulled this way or that, and you were in a sense part of the show for everyone else seated in the theater. So your own inability in a way to act and respond becomes part of the spectacle of our dealing with this crisis, which we're seem very incapable of solving as humans. And I think in the experience of that, you're caught between also what to register, because across the screen you've got text. You're trying to read the text. The text itself is computer generated. It's from the research, but it's halting. It breaks. It tries to say things, to speak what's happening, but the horrors are unspeakable. It stutters. It tries to describe the flow, the ebb, the movements. And as it tries to say that, the words of the chemicals come flashing at you. And all the things in the water as the waters rise. And the more it goes on, the more it comes. And if you don't take action, it gets worse and worse. And you feel like, what action can you take? Meanwhile, the horns are coming like ships led by trombonists that come from side to side. Beacons of the lighthouses are shining and calling you from spot to spot. There are moorings that you can grab onto. You would feel like you could dock your boat and slowly those submerge. All of these elements are at play, and all the time you're coming back to this language, an attempt to speak what's happening before it gets out of control. And I think part of that language is, which is so much as talking about the petrochemical pollution in our waterscape, is how we live with a certain kind of language. We live with this language created by the Industrial Revolution. And if we don't address that, we don't change, we don't find solutions. We don't find solutions without going back in history to enter into the logic of what we're in. And I don't know what the solutions are to climate change exactly. I mean, I don't know if we can stop it before it happens. We know there are many things that would help slow it. But one thing I do know from all the time on the Delaware River, and something I think you've come to know so well with so many of the other projects you're doing too, is that we live surrounded by the decaying architecture of these industries that started early in the Industrial Revolution: steel industries, coal industries, and especially petrochemical industries. And if we don't clean that mess up before climate change happens, it's not just floods over this area, it's incredibly toxic, dangerous floods that will destroy water supplies, destroy farmlands, destroy lives.
One of the things that was so sort of sublimely scary. And I think really was difficult for me was the way that the immersion, the immersive experience, particularly of the live performance, made me realize in a sense that I was part of this chemical bath, right? So it was this feeling of thinking through like, oh, I wonder how much toluene is already in my system. There's no way outside of this. And this is something that, presents incredible representational problems for climate change more generally, that Tim Morton has theorized very popularly as a hyperobject, that there's no way to be outside of it, no way to think with our usual enlightenment logics of the distance observer who might be able to see and represent what is happening. I'm curious so much about that fragmentation of language that happens, and hearing you talk about one of the things that we need is a language that would allow us to move forward or take action. How does that work? I mean, the fragmentation is there, the kind of gesturing towards a new way of maybe needing to think and represent. Is the Altering Shores also thinking through what types of representational logics might be there? Certainly the language of grief and elegy, I think is part of what you're working with, but I'm really curious about what types of forms you're finding commensurate even to bridge this gap between sadness and real the tragedy that is ongoing, and ways to at least ameliorate some and mitigate some of that loss that we are experiencing.
Altering Shores is considered to be a multimodal work and part of a broader set of experiences. And the performance is designed particularly to address this sense of the body and perception and cognition of what's happening. The ability, the experience of actually feeling it happen viscerally, being caught between all of these forces that are very visceral. The need to make sense of what you see, to sort one's perception, to think about it, and in the cognitive sense, to name, to go through an act of naming. We live mostly with an inadequate language. So this is in that barrage, this piece, the barrage of it is to highlight that need for naming. We're all moving through this in and out of each other's worlds, and all displaced by this, and will be more displaced.
One of the things that I was very curious about, if you wanted to talk about the ways that the live performance also is suggestive of other human-human relations. It's such a collaborative piece, right? Like you collaborated with musicians, with poets, with actors, with trained actors, untrained actors, with a live audience who sat in the chair, and I just was really struck by the ways that the affective relations between human communities was also something that was very much part of the ways that maybe a central part of what the Altering Shores was designed to do, to show us the fluidity of those relations, the possibility of remaking relations, both between human solidarities, but also, of course, with the more than human world. I'm kind of thinking about, like, what are the next steps? Like, where is the piece going next?
Yeah, the sense that we're all caught in that moment of the performance, of these things happening that's out of control, it's spinning faster and faster, and that the performers specifically, so we had performers that were trained to respond to what's happening, and then people like yourself on the stage who were caught up in it, just as we're all caught up in this going on. There are no rules for what's happening. I didn't give the performers in this case any instructions, but nor do we have instructions. And so we're pulled this way or that. And part of that is then to grasp what's going on. Can I name it? Can I say something? Can I grasp what's happening? Can I go back to the origins of that and see how it connects me to a history? and the consequences of that language are consequences of history, that are the consequences of land use. And in the sense of this stuff moving so fluidly between a landscape, the natural land, the flow of the water, the flow of the language, the flow of the people, all of these things moving through each other, is that what happens in the marshes happens to us. What happens in the refinery happens to us. And it's happening to us. How those happen to us is the consequences of choices made. Not by us, but by other humans at other times. But we still make those choices or fail to make those choices. You've been involved with choices of what to do with refinery lands down on the Schuylkill River. Those choices have significant impact on what flows in and around through us. And if the better we feel connected, the better we can name our relationship to these things, perhaps the better we can participate in these public dialogues directly, but also perhaps the better we can get a sense of our relationships to the world around us that gives us a different sense of the whole, or a sense of a resilience where we can build consensus about what our relationship is to this world, because we begin to develop a language for it. Without building consensus, we just keep getting caught in this thing that overtakes us. And we perhaps lack in the current kind of political debate, which tends to get very polarized, that consensus building form, which is where the arts do play a role, and the humanities do play a role, and teaching plays a role, and going out and participating in the environments and doing things in these places plays a role, because they offer different languages for building consensus.